Good morning. My name is Jack Doggett, and it's my pleasure to serve as worship leader today. One of the things I love about this congregation is the buzz that happens about 30 minutes before a service. The volunteers, the ushers, the greeters, the AV team, everyone who's expending energy and effort to get this service going. It's just such a wonderful feeling that there's so many people engaged in volunteering here. It's a really rich experience for me. I want to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. I want to take a moment to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who may be visiting for the first time. If you're joining us online, would you please fill out a visitor form link in the description? We'd love to connect with you. Some of us are bringing our best selves to this space, and some of us are bringing our struggling selves. All of us are welcome here, and all of us are loved. Some of us already have open hearts, and some of us may not quite be there yet because our hearts got a little beat up this week, particularly if we're watching news, and might have forgotten how to trust and open. Your heart is welcome here, no matter how bruised. We welcome you among us. All of us are imperfect, but we're here to drop our defenses and trust that what happens in worship is powerful and life-giving. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser than when we woke up this morning. We welcome you here. There's a couple of brief announcements. First, our annual auction is coming up. The silent auction bidding starts next Sunday, so please stop by the auction table in the Sky Room after the service and make a donation to be listed. And while you're there, you can buy tickets for the auction and dinner, which occurs. I've also been asked by the auction team that over the last week or two, people have signed up on a sheet of paper items they're donating, and much to their distress, that piece of paper has disappeared. So if you can remember what you had offered, please drop by the auction table again and renew your offering of what we will all be so excited to bid on at the auction. Secondly, I want to invite you back this evening for a special service at 6 o'clock to celebrate the equinox. In case you hadn't noticed, fall seemed to have arrived about 3 a.m. Myself and others I've noticed have gotten into their winter wardrobes this morning, and it's a nice collection of sweaters and shawls that I see out there. So tonight's service at 6 will be led by Rachel, Dr. Emily, and Reverend David. You're invited together to eat, to reflect, and embody in ritual what it is you are harvesting in your own life in this moment, where we see and experience balance between the light of summer and the dark of winter coming on. As we gather this morning, we are not bound together by a creed. There is no list of specific things that we all believe in exactly the same way. We are united by our shared values and by the commitments we make to each other about what creates this community. To name that commitment, will you join together in person or online to speak our covenant aloud as one? We gather in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to seek the truth divine. So be it. Our flaming chalice is a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. It suggests perhaps that within our separate selves burns a flame of unity and connection and compassion. Once felt, that fire cannot be extinguished. And so we gather, weaving our lives together. I'd like to invite Dorothy Charlo to light this morning's chalice.
Hello. The words of a piece that I sang with the choir a couple of weeks ago have been haunting me. They went like this: we are here together in this holy moment, and we're grateful for the winding road that brought us to this place. It got me thinking about my own long, winding road. As a child growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas, I went to the Methodist church that my parents sent me to. My experiences there were not happy because the two bad things that I was worrying about, the cruelty of white people to black people and the horrors of the Second World War, were never addressed in church. When it came time for college, I chose to get out of Little Rock and went to a Quaker college near Philadelphia because I knew that the history of the Quakers was an abolitionist history and that they were pacifists. And I thought that would be a good fit for me, and it was. When I went to graduate school, I sang with the choir in the beautiful chapel of the University of Chicago, and I found it a spiritual experience. So throughout my life, I have sung with community choruses that always meet in churches. I met my husband, Jim, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Neither of us were church people. He was an ex-Catholic with a focus on ex. But we wanted to get married in a church because we thought our parents would be more comfortable with that. We also wanted to write our own vows and make them to each other rather than to a God that we didn't believe in. We found a Baptist minister, part of the old Cambridge Historic Baptist Church, that was pleased to marry us and allowed us to write our own vows. In 1968, we moved to Denver and started our family in the integrated Park Hill neighborhood of Denver. I enrolled our little daughter, Catherine, in the marvelous preschool at the Park Hill Methodist Church. Since we weren't church people, we did not take our kids to church. But I was beginning to notice that the important things that seemed to take place in my life either happened in libraries or churches. In the 1980s, I joined with a group of psychologists and other mental health professionals to advocate for nuclear disarmament and to bring psychological sanity to nuclear affairs. We put together a conference with the theme of helping young people deal with their fears of nuclear war. The only place that opened its doors to us to hold this conference was the Unitarian Church in downtown Denver. With our kids launched, my husband and I moved to Boulder in 1990. He joined a neighborhood Buddhist meditation group, and I took up yoga in this church. It was held in this church. In 2016, with my husband now in memory care with advanced Alzheimer's, I came to this church looking for a place to have a memorial service for my husband. I found a community of people with shared values that helped me both with my personal sorrow and my political despair. When Jim died, we held the memorial service here. So now, late in my long life, I have become a church person. I light this chalice in delight at being here with you in this holy moment and in gratitude for the long and winding road that brought me to this place.
Our Puritan ancestors believed in predestination. God had already chosen who was going to be saved, which presents a problem. How do you know who's going to be saved? Well, the way you know And the way you proved to others that you're worthy was by acting so perfectly correct on the outside that no one had any doubts about your perfection on the inside. You know that someone is good on the inside because they act right, they pray right, they earn lots of money, they look good, they eat right. Some of those actually are our assumptions today, not theirs back then. This is, though, this sort of a theology, this is a theology of self-loathing. No matter how perfect you seem on the outside, no matter how good you do, no matter how perfectly you say just the right words in just the right order, down in the center of yourself, you will never be good enough, no matter what you do. And you should be ashamed of yourself because deep down you are bad and broken and cannot be fixed. Shame breeds self-righteousness and self-certainty. Shame like that means you can never learn anything new. It means you can never say, I was mistaken, because the risk of imperfection is shattering. You can't admit a mistake. You can't genuinely apologize. You can't make repair in a relationship, because all of that would be to admit that you're less than perfect. We have long since left our Puritan ancestors' theology, and our Puritan ancestors' theology has long since ingrained itself in our culture. It is an act of profound bravery to walk away from that kind of living. Not once and for all perfectly, but day by day, choosing not to live a private theology of your own unworthiness. It is an act of love for yourself and a blessing to the world to come back home just to being a regular person again, to let go of perfection and to let go of unworthiness. These words from my friend and colleague, the Reverend Erica Hewitt. As we enter into worship, put away the pressures of the world that ask us to perform, to take up masks, to put on brave fronts. Silence the voices that ask you to be perfect. This is a community of compassion and welcome. And you don't have to do anything to earn the love contained within these walls. You don't have to be braver or smarter or stronger or better than you are in this moment to belong here with us. You have only to bring the gift of your body, no matter how able, and your seeking mind, no matter how busy, and your animal heart, no matter how broken. Bring all that you are and all that you love to this hour together. And find that feeling. It's like a spiritual chiropractor lining our bones back into place again so there's something solid in you for your soul to stand on, that you belong just exactly where you are and as you are. Even if you've never been here before, you already belong. That transformation from a stranger to someone already home without knowing it, that's the invitation. It's the promise of this congregation and many others. An invitation into an undivided life that is whole in our brokenness. We are a community of memory and of hope. And our joyfulness, our celebration, the laughter in this house, it's not naive. We know how, every one of us knows how difficult it is to be a person in the world. Maybe it's not sharp this week, this moment today, but you know it. We know how many times we're asked to mask who we are, to live in fragments instead of as whole people. We know how many parts of this nation say we don't count. That you don't count. because you're a woman, you're queer, you're too old, too young, not white, not Christian, not the right kind of Christian. We face that reality. And instead of despair or nihilism or avoidance or denial, we remember in every breath, you don't have to do anything to earn the love contained in these walls. We are a community of memory planted at the gates of hope, already worthy and beloved in our imperfection. Remembering that, coming back home to that, is how we become a people who bend the arc of the universe toward justice.
Please rise in body or in spirit. There it goes. And join in our opening hymn number 119, Once to Every Soul and Nation. We are the people of the living tradition. Our faith calls us to observe the world around us with clear eyes and hearts full of hope. And so this song, old as it is, reminds us that we are part of a lineage of people who were willing to face the truth and persevere. There we go. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. Then to stand with truth is noble when we share its wretched crust, ere that claws bring fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to be just. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Though its portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, then it is the brave one chooses, while the coward stands aside, till the multitude make virtue of the faith they have denied.
Join me in a spirit of prayer and meditation. Explaining that invitation, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote once simply that religious experience is the awareness of the presence of the divine. He says it's not an intellectual formulation about God. He's a Christian, that's the language he uses. It's a lasting acquaintance with God. Which is to say, religious experience is the awareness of the presence of love, a lasting acquaintance with love. And we talk about that by lots of different names and in lots of different ways. I'm not here trying to explain the right way for you to do it, except to say this is an experience. The invitation into prayer and meditation, it's an invitation into experience, into a kind of a connection with a part of yourself within or maybe beyond you. A reconnection with the larger reality of beauty, of wholeness, of community, which some of us call God and some of us feel in the deepest sense of life itself. So will you join me in a spirit of prayer and meditation? Our words for meditation are by the poet Boris Novak, called Decisions. Between two words, choose the quieter one. Between word and silence, choose listening. Between two books, choose the dustier one. Between the earth and the sky, choose a bird. Between two animals, choose the one who needs you more. Between two children, choose both. Between the lesser and the bigger evil, choose neither. And between hope and despair, choose hope. It will be harder to bear. Be together in silence for a few moments. Amen. Take a breath with me. And another. Close your eyes, if you will, if you want, and call to mind those things this week that you feel gratitude for. Maybe your gratitude is for triumph and success. Maybe your gratitude is for the diagnosis that didn't happen. Maybe your gratitude is someone you love. Maybe your gratitude is hard to see this week. Maybe it's only half glimpsed out of the corner of your eye for an instant. Whatever that is, whether that is the story of your day or whether that is hard to find, bring that gratitude to mind. And then without letting go of it, without releasing your thankfulness, bring to mind too the grief that you carried this week. And it may be that grief was the story of your week this week. It may be that grief, that anxiety, that despair was a constant companion every day. Or it may be that you only glimpsed it out of the corner of your eye. Even so, there it is in your life. And we call it to mind, and we hold it, and we know it, right there alongside gratitude. Each week in the service, we set aside time to make visible in ritual the joys and the sorrows on our hearts. And I invite you, when the music begins in a moment, to come forward as you feel moved, starting with the back of the room and the side, and then folks in front. And silently to take a stone and to hold it in symbol of your joys and your cares, and then place it in the earth as your internal landscape becomes part of a larger landscape of this whole community. This week, we hold in love Elena Slesser. Some of you knew her. Her obituary is on the bulletin board. Her service is at the Boulder Valley Fellowship on October 5th at 2 o'clock. And we remember and name and face that last night in the city of Birmingham, Dr. Emily writes, in my adopted city of Birmingham, 21 people were shot. 4 are dead. We send prayer and hope for healing. And I invite you to come forward as you feel moved to add your sorrow and your joy.
My, oh my, we must have got it wrong. Falling skies, the storm is coming strong. No one is coming out of this unscathed. Who could be ready for these warring games? My, oh my, we must have got it wrong. The world is unraveling, unraveling. Such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling, the world is unraveling, unraveling. Such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling. Oh, 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 oh. My, oh my, we're in the final act. Can't fight the tide. The sea is turning black. No one is coming out of this unscathed. No one could be ready for these warring games. My, oh my, we must have got it wrong. The world is unraveling, unraveling. Such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling, the world is unraveling, unraveling. Such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling. Oh, oh, such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling. Oh, oh, such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling. Oh, oh, such a mad, mad reckoning. The world's unraveling.
There was a common thread binding together the people who carried out the January 6th insurrection, a thread that wove through the diversity of groups gathered that day: Oath Keepers, 3%ers, neo-Confederates, neo-Nazis, and many citizens of no overt extremist group who nonetheless were convinced the election was stolen. The common thread was Christian nationalism. And it's public, all of it was out in the open, was right in front of us in the crosses they carried, and the Virgin Mary paintings and the white Jesus paintings. They waved Christian flags and Jesus flags. They held signs and wore clothes with Bible verses. They prayed before breaching the Capitol, and from the Senate, they led prayer with a bullhorn. Divine Creator, thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray. Luke Mogelson, the New Yorker journalist who filmed video from inside the Capitol that day, said, "The Christianity was one of the surprises to me in covering this stuff, and it has been hugely underestimated. That Christian nationalism is the driving and the unifying force of these disparate players. It's Christianity that ties it together." When fascism comes to America, the saying goes, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying the cross. And I have lived my whole life in places and communities where that wasn't really present to me, where it wasn't really that visible. In the south side of Chicago and in the Twin Cities, in Boston, in Boulder, it's still a surprise to be driving down to Denver the other day and see a 3%er sticker on the back of the truck passing me. But it's real and it's present, even if it might not be visible to me in most of the spaces I travel. Every Trump campaign rally begins with a prayer. That's not surprising. If you watched the Democratic National Convention, everything there began with a prayer too. Every Trump campaign rally begins with a prayer. It doesn't get much press coverage. It doesn't get much analysis or commentary. It feels a little bit uncomfortable right now to be talking about it. We live in a religiously plural country where there's all sorts of faiths believing all sorts of things. And it seems at best impolite or at worst outright intolerant to critique someone else's prayer. And it's easy for us to fall into a sort of smug, self-satisfied triumphalism about how wise we are and how ignorant they are. And we can get stuck, too, in a trap of forgetting that there are as many different kinds of Christianity as there are different kinds of Unitarian Universalism in this room right now. So we tend to avoid critiquing other people's prayers, but no matter how tolerant you are of someone else's views, we cannot tolerate intolerance. This is the argument of the philosopher Karl Popper, who makes this case in 1945. The year is not a coincidence. Growing up in Vienna under the clouds of Nazism and the grandchild of Jews, Popper saw firsthand that an open society which tolerates totalitarianism rapidly disappears. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who would destroy it, then it will be destroyed. So, here it is, a typical example of the prayer. This from a reporter in Durham, New Hampshire, at a rally 9 months ago. A week before Christmas, an evangelical minister named Paul Terry stood before thousands of Christians, their heads bowed, and pleaded with God for deliverance. The nation was in crisis, he told the Lord, racked with death and addiction, led by wicked men who rule with imperial disdain. With every passing day, he prayed, we slip farther and farther into George Orwell's tyrannical dystopia. But because God is merciful, there is reason for hope. One man stood ready to redeem the country. Donald Trump, and he was about to come on stage. Terry prayed, we know what he did for us and how he strove to lead us in honorable ways during his term as our president, in ways that brought your blessings to us rather than reproach and judgment. We know the hour is late. We know that time grows shorter for us to be saved and revived. In this story, in this prayer, in this telling, American identity and Christian identity are one and the same. The nation is in crisis because its leaders aren't real Christians following God's commands. And certainly not everyone who supports the former president thinks this way, but almost everyone who thinks this way supports the former president. The conservative Christian narrative, says one writer, is that America, like ancient Israel, has broken its special covenant with God, and it's suffering the consequences. And Christian nationalism, then, is a political ideology and a cultural framework to merge Christian and American identities, distorting both the Christian faith and America's constitutional democracy. It relies on the mythological founding of the United States as a Christian nation, singled out for God's providence in order to fulfill God's purposes on earth. And it demands a privileged place for Christianity in public life, buttressed by the active support of government at all levels. The premise, then, of all these prayers at all these rallies, writes one researcher on the intersection of religion and politics, the premise is that America's covenant can be reestablished and its special place as God's kingdom can be restored if the nation repents and turns back to him. And these ideas have long percolated on the religious right. What's new is how many Christians now seem convinced that God has appointed a specific leader who, like the prophets of old, is prepared to defeat the forces of evil and redeem the country. The movement is a political movement. And its principal goal, says one commentator, the goal of its most active leaders is power. Its leadership looks forward to the day when they can rely on government for three things: power and influence for themselves and their political allies, a steady stream of taxpayer funding for their initiatives, and policies that favor approved religious and political viewpoints. It's heavy. Because Christian nationalism is identified with a religion, the movement is often understood for a person like me who hasn't been inside this space. The movement's often understood as a set of religious or theological positions that you start with, and then these positions, your theology leads in a sort of deductive way to a certain kind of cultural or policy preference, and then those preferences lead to a certain set of politics. That makes sense, but it's not how it actually works. It's not a reasoned, deductive argument. It's a story about a mythic past and a promised future. Christian nationalism is not a political party. It's not even a set of governing principles. It's a rhetoric. It is a way of speaking to shape a story that seizes a common sense understanding of the world, that defines what we ought to think of this nation as in common sense terms. The mythic past is actually about the present. The founders of this nation were Christians, just like we're Christians right now. The founders were right and righteous and pure, with character and loyalty and leadership and godliness, just like we have right now. In other words, once upon a time, the world was as it should be, with the right people, the pure people, the worthy people, who are all white men, on top. And when they say a Christian nation, that we're founded as a Christian nation, that we need to return to Christian nation, it has a very particular meaning. This is not do unto others as you would have them do unto you Christianity. This is not Sermon on the Mount Christianity. This is a very specific vision of 20th century evangelical Christianity, read into the past and then promised in the future. the belief that America is God's chosen nation and must be defended as such, writes one author, it is a powerful predictor of intolerance towards immigrants and racial minorities and non-Christians. It is linked to opposition to gay rights, to support for harsher punishments for criminals, to justifications for the use of excessive force against Black Americans in law enforcement situations, and to traditionalist gender ideology. It demands a rugged, aggressive, militant white masculinity, where a father's rule in the home is inextricably linked to heroic leadership on a national stage. And the fate of the nation hinges on both of these things. Our mythic past as a Christian nation in this story gives divine authority to white male rule to keep the country pure. And with the preservation of purity as a sacred goal, there's no space for any form of leadership except power over, writes the Episcopal theologian Carter Heyward. You need power over to keep tight control, to mete out punishment to offenders who would pollute what is otherwise pure. You need control, you need power to maintain purity as a spiritual, a social, as a political goal. Patriotic American Christians keep tight control of their government, their communities, their families, themselves. It is the basis of theocracy. The Missouri State Legislature's ban on abortion begins by declaring in the first clause of the first sentence of the first paragraph, in recognition that Almighty God is the author of life. That is to say, the justification for removing a woman's right to control her own body is not the will of the people or the requirements of common ethics. It's not from an evaluation of our shared values and an expression of them. It is because one particular version of Christianity demands it. And the state, when it has the power to do so, makes theology into law. And this is the basis on which two Unitarian Universalist ministers join others of many traditions challenging that law on religious freedom grounds. Christian nationalism, like every sort of fascism, is a path to power that begins with a mythic past that will become your promised future. Once you were great, but they took it away, and I will give it back to you. And once you believe that, only your pastor and his allies are the ones telling the real truth. The movement is led from the top down through faith communities across denominations, connected by networks of pastors, sharing tools to deliver the correct message. It is electoral politics sold as spiritual warfare. You get people to sign on to a fantasy version of reality, says one writer. And from then on, the anchor isn't the real world around them, it's the leader who will restore them to greatness. The author and journalist Catherine Stewart describes it this way. She says, "The movement offers its supporters a means of reconciling two contradictory notions. That our nation is the greatest nation on earth, precisely because it's a Christian nation, and at the same time that we are overrun with alien and evil forces. On the one hand, Christian nationalists are America, at least in their own minds. They're true believers. On the other hand, movement supporters are persuaded that America is in the grip of malevolent forces, secularists, the homosexual agenda, the communist threat, even demonic organizations from which they must take America back. and the ability to keep a population in this state of tension. It's an apocalyptic struggle between absolute good and its opposite. That's the fuel for the movement's power. It is maybe a little overwhelming to lay it all out that directly. It's heavy. It's scary. Maybe it feels angry or despairing. Walter Brueggemann, an esteemed theologian and scholar of the Hebrew prophets, says that the church, the progressive church, the church alive in the world, for the world, is called to practice three things: realism in the face of ideology, grief when the world is in denial, and hope when the world is in despair. Realism in the face of ideology means telling the real stories of this country, of not looking back to a mythic past that never happened, but telling the whole and complicated story of a plural nation under the rule of law, not the rule of God. Realism in the face of ideology. And grief when the world is in denial. It is so much easier not to talk about this, especially right here, especially in Boulder, especially on the Front Range, in Denver, in so many of the spaces that you move through, that we move through. It's easier to pretend that this isn't happening. It's easier, at least for the moment, to say to yourself that Christian nationalism is not what unites the right on January 6th. It's easier to say this is occasional and incidental. But our work is harder than that. It's the work of grief. It's to face the reality of this movement alive and growing and powerful in this country, and to name it and to mourn it, to mourn the real loss that comes, to mourn the damage that's being done to a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, and to feel it. But the last task, because we don't leave it there, is hope when the world is in despair. Hope doesn't mean that everything's just going to turn out okay. Hope means that something else is possible, something else is plausible, something else is worth working for. Hope says that this movement doesn't get the last word. Hope says there's a better possibility ahead, and it matters that we work for it. It matters that we show up to city council meetings. It matters that we steadily move lawsuits forward on religious freedom grounds, and not all of them will win, even if they should, but we'll keep on steadily moving forward all the same. That's hope. Years ago, when she was reading Brueggemann's book, my wife Terry left it in the church office, and I found a reminder post-it on her purse on the counter at home, which said, "Go find reality, grief, and hope at church." That is the church's job. That's our job, all of us together. And some days you want to just name the reality and have the right analysis and stop there, because feeling the grief of it is too much. And some days you're stuck in just the grief of it, and it's overwhelming. And some days you have the thin hope that says everything's going to be okay without facing reality and grief. But our work, all together, is to go find reality, grief, and hope, and to pass it off one to another when it's hard to find. Amen.
We're supposed to sing now. But before we do, take a moment to feel what's happening in your body right now. We are a tradition that sometimes gets a bad rep for being overly intellectual. Not that being thinkers is bad, but sometimes it keeps us in that cognitive space and makes it hard to find that hope, to actually feel the grief. So see what you can track for yourself. I've heard that sermon twice today, and so underneath my heart, I feel this gripping, this squeezing that almost leads to a sense of nausea, right? You might feel tension holding on to you somewhere. You might feel the flutter of anxiety, a shortness of breath. What does your body tell you about this moment? And just as we started our service this morning in song, we'll return to this practice, this collective gathering of energy, as people of conscience have done throughout the centuries, throughout the history of this country and others. So will you rise in body or in spirit and join in this movement song? It repeats a lot and is designed for you to catch on, so when you feel like you've latched on to a part, join me. We rise, humbly hearted, rise, won't be divided, rise, with spirit to guide us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise. All of the children rise. Elders with wisdom rise. Ancestors surround us, rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise. Up from the wreckage, rise. With tears and with courage, rise. Fighting for life, rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise. Humbly sorry. Rise with spirit to guide us. Rise.
Let that soak in for a minute. This month, we share our offering with TP Raisers, an organization which strives to alleviate conditions of poverty, honor indigenous wisdom, and reconcile our shared history with people of the First Nations, and empower youth with the leadership skills needed to affect social change in their communities. The shared goal ultimately focuses on reconciling the difficult history of indigenous people and the U.S. government, believing in the healing power of relationships. Meaningful relationships is the key to any transformative justice work. Over the 5 years of UUCB's partnership with TP Raisers, about 70 folks from our congregation have joined trips with TP Raisers led to the Pine Ridge Reservation and to the Hopi and Navajo nations. I invite you to give as generously as you are able. For those online, you can use a QR code or find a link in the video description. And for those of us gathered in person, you can scan the QR code or make a donation as the ushers now pass the baskets. May our gifts be used to enact justice, bringing peace and love to the Boulder community and beyond.
Close with these words from my friend and mentor, the Reverend Victoria Safford. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, not the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, nor the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill and angry hinges. Not to plant ourselves, at the cheerful, flimsy garden gate of everything's going to be all right, but a different, sometimes lonely place. A place of truth-telling about your own soul, first of all, and its condition. The place of resistance and defiance. The piece of ground from which you see the world both as it is and as it could be, as it will be. The place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but the joy of the struggle. And we stand there, beckoning and calling, telling people what we see, asking people what they see. We rise in body or in spirit. We'll close in song.